Well, good morning, everybody. I hope you're having a fantastic day. It's a windy day here in Zone 8A in North Carolina, and we are going to be getting our next round of tomatoes started so we can put them in this onion bed when it's all said and done. So it's a really critical time. We want to make sure they get enough roots so they can get going, and we get some free tomato plants. So if I had to look at this bed, I'd estimate we have right around a month left for it to grow. The onions are bulbing, the garlic is actually getting pretty big, and it's funny. I have this ant pile here, and when I looked down into it the other day, I'm trying not to get bit. It was kind of leaning over. Look how thick that stalk is for the garlic. So we should be sitting pretty for that. But this is one of the tasks that we do in May, where we start our second round of tomatoes, but we don't start them from seed. I'm gonna propagate some. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's free. It's just, and I like doing it. I like propagating. That's one of my favorite things to do in the garden because, I mean, basically you're getting free garden plants. These are gonna be my three suspects that we use. I usually don't trim my determinate tomatoes, and this really works better on determinate tomatoes just for the way that they're set up and the way they grow. So we're gonna take a couple suckers and get those started. And these grew a lot faster than I thought. I mean, just a week ago, they were like this big. So now, I mean, you can see the top of it's here. So this is prime for starting to plant. Now, the reason I say that it's not good, I mean, you can do it for indeterminate tomatoes, but for us, this is a second planting. And so just by design, the nature of a determinate tomato is they grow, they put all their tomatoes on at once and they're done. So this is going to be a little bit of a race against time for the fall and the winter season. So we want to try and get as much as we can, and an indeterminate can take a long time to produce. So we're just going to stick with the determinants, excuse me. And these are aroma variety. Those are the only determinants we're growing this year. Next year, I have a feeling we're going to change that up, but for right now, this is what we're going to work with. Typically don't do a whole lot of trimming on my determinate tomatoes. I like to trim up a little bit just so there's some decent airflow underneath. It helps keep the disease off of them. So we'll do a little bit of that, but not like a crazy amount. And like removing these right here, like if this branch right here is not one that you would root, but when they're leaning down like this and they're touching the ground, it can introduce diseases into your tomatoes. So that's why we come through and we'll just kind of cut these off. And I'll usually try and cut them off to about right here. And that way air can just kind of flow underneath the tomatoes at all times and keep them growing. But this is our sucker that we're gonna take. So we're gonna clip it. So satisfying. And we're just gonna set it in the shade for right now. Ideally you'd have a cup of water, but I'm gonna be doing this pretty quick. And so over on this one here, you can see you have your regular branch, don't know the technical term for it, and then you have your sucker. So this is the one we're going to keep. So we're going to take that, and then we'll cut this. And so this is what we're going to keep right here. And while we're here, here's another sucker, so we can go ahead and utilize this one since we're going to trim anyways. And then I'll come back at, after I get done with the video, and I'll finish trimming up everything to a certain height, make sure nothing's touching or anything like that, and just good compost fuel. Now I don't like to take the other branches off really on determinate tomatoes because every time you trim it, it kind of sets the plant back a little bit. And the idea with the determinate tomatoes is just kind of let them grow and let them produce as fast as possible so you get that big flush of tomatoes that we're looking for. But we've got a handful, so we'll see what we can do with these. And it's all about just basically right now with these being as quick as possible so they don't dry out. I've got all my pots laid out here, and what I do while I do that is I stick my cuttings in water just so they continuously stay hydrated. It's really important right now. And as far as the soil goes, I got a comment on another video about what I use. This is regular potting soil. Just any bag that you get, except for I sift it, and so I get all the big chunks out of it. And this is what I use to sift it. So I just got some hardware cloth. You can see how small the grains are, and I just sit next to it, put this on the bucket, dump the soil in, and I'll just rub my hands across it and just sift it, and I get all the big chunks out of it. And then I just take those big chunks and I put them into the compost or other beds, or just amend something, you know, anything like that. I think this didn't cost me anything because I had the wood laying around and a random piece of this. So you could find this in a lot of places if you know a friend or something. But you can get a roll of it cheap and you can use it in other places. But this has been a really big help. And you can use regular potting soil straight out of the bag, but it doesn't work as well. So I mean, you got to think you're going to take this plant right here and you're trying to encourage roots to come all out of the bottom. So you don't want a whole lot of chunky stuff in there. You really want to get it so that it can freely move about in the pot and stuff like that. Now, if your first couple of years, you can use like a clear plastic cup, and that way you can actually see the roots growing, and that works really good. But for this wood, we just want to get this as deep as possible. And I have to remember that there's not a lot of, there's no roots on here, so it can't support the leaf life. So we actually take a lot of the leaves off, and then I just slide it in as deep as it'll go, all the way to the bottom. So the idea is just to keep it nice and wet after this and keep everything going, you know, stay as moist as it can and promote that root growth within this tomato plant. Because I mean, you can root tomatoes in just water. So if you think about that, like keeping these oversaturated or anything like that, it's really not that big a deal. So I miscounted and I've got 2 extra pots, but I'll get some to fill it up after I go cut 2 more. And I really only plan to plant 3 of these, but I keep a little extra in case, you know, you don't have a high success rate or something like that. I mean, it's not that big a deal. And then I just take this whole can and really saturate everything. And this is really important. So we're gonna saturate it down, and then we're also gonna fill up this pot underneath, this container. And we're just gonna let it sit in the water for days. You know, probably today is Wednesday, so I'll probably let it sit out here until Sunday or Monday before I start looking to do anything different. And that way these plants can just really uptake all the water they want. The roots can get started. You know, in case I don't get this saturated good enough, it'll continue to saturate with this. And you're gonna see some limping and stuff like that, some wilting, and that's perfectly normal. And that's actually a good indication of what's going on. So when these start to perk up, that's my key to move them out of the shade. So back here where I am, I'm on my washing table. We get plenty of shade back here. So I'll put them up there, I'll let them sit in the shade, and once they start to perk up and they've been perked up for a couple of days, then we're gonna start moving them out closer and closer into the sun. But we're always gonna keep a little bit of water in here for a couple weeks, probably about 2 weeks. We'll let it dry down, we'll fill it up, we'll let it dry down. And once you start seeing new growth on these plants, that's when I'm gonna start keeping it a little bit more dry and watering it a little bit more intentionally. So when we get ready to put them in the ground, we should be able to pull them out and see roots. And if you keep a little bit of water at the bottom, you'll see the roots come out underneath. And that's gonna be a very good indication, obviously, because then that means you're filling up with roots in the pot and you know you're basically ready to go. I was thinking about putting them in this potato bed when it's done, but come to find out, potatoes are kind of in the nightshade family. So I decided not to do that and just put them over here. We could still do something like that, but I highly doubt it. I'm probably, once this bed of squash goes, we're probably gonna just put squash over here instead. I'm not really sure what I wanna put in this bed. This has been a big question mark. I mean, if you think about it, it's gonna be done, the potatoes should be done in early June. And that means we still have an entire growing season after that to grow. So we kind of got to figure out what we want to fit into this spot afterwards. We may come back in and attempt to do another sowing of corn if we can do it soon enough. Anything to kind of get that ground used, because the last thing I want is this bed to sit empty. That's a big part of our garden. So we're going to figure out something to put in there. We may put in, we may just amend it really well and try and get as early as we can of a squash planting or a fall planting in there, excuse me. So we could do something like that. But the other day we did something, and I want to show you something. I'm super excited about this. It's finally time for our sweet potatoes. So since we have a little extra time, we went ahead and planted all of our sweet potatoes. These 2 rows back here are Beauregards. They're the ones that we actually got 6-packs of from the store. And everything else in these 2 rows are Georgia Jets that we started from our potatoes from last year. So I'm excited to see, which one produces better, because the Georgia Jets, the front row were just slips that we started, and then we stuck them in water to get roots. The next row of Georgia Jets behind it are actually ones that we had rooted, and then we stuck in 6-packs to get more roots. And then the Beauregard are all potatoes that were already in 6-packs. So we're excited to see like how many we're gonna get out of it. So that officially wraps up all of spring. I harvested everything from spring. That's that was meant to be harvested in spring. We are now, I would say, 6 weeks before summer, and we're just about to get our onions and our potatoes, so things are going in the right direction. And with the amount of tomatoes that I started, and I'm gonna have to get 2 more cuttings, if I have to, I'll do a whole bed of tomatoes right here just to kind of finish out the year, make sure we get some good stores for winter, because that's gonna make a big difference for our winter and going into next year, having all the canned tomatoes that we can. We really like canned tomatoes in our house. So when we come in the greenhouse, we've got our ground cherries here, which are a really important crop for us. And we may end up doing a little bit of propagation from this. And so from this tomato here, we would let, like this right here, once it gets a little bit bigger, we could potentially use this as a cutting right here. This is another sucker. But you don't want to take these off as much as possible, because these are what actually shade the tomatoes from getting burned. So even on the regular plants, you'll have the ones that have the sucker come out, then you have the other ones that would come way out. Those you want to leave on, because that's what collects the energy for the plant. It's all about balancing energy, and that's why these suckers on some varieties are not good, and in some varieties they are, and it depends too. A lot of people don't single stem their indeterminate tomatoes. I'm kind of on the fence, and I'm going to do a modified single stem and basically just manage it for airflow through the plant, because I got to worry about disease and stuff. Come about July, watch and see how much disease we get in our garden, and we're going to try and combat it, but it's just an uphill battle. So we're going to try and really stay on top of it and just see what we can keep and what we can get started. And if we need to do replacements or stuff like this, this is a really good method, because you can keep this on hand. You can go ahead and get it started early, and then if something happens, you have a tomato to put in its place, versus just kind of being stuck with nothing and having a fail of a harvest. So propagating is one of my, if not the thing that I love the most about gardening, because you're just taking a cutting and you're creating a whole new plant and a whole new nature, and you're just getting all of that harvest as much as you can off of each plant, and it's all about utilizing it to your best ability. Goodbye.